Welcome to the Citizens Band Radio Hour. Thoughtful conversations that explore issues of media and journalism, democracy and citizenship. The Citizens Band Radio Hour is sponsored by the Center for Media and Citizenship at the University of Virginia. You can visit the center online at mediaandcitizenship.org. Here's your host, Coy Barefoot.
My guest is Kathy Galvin. She is a member of Charlottesville City Council, serving on her second term in office. Kathy, thank you for coming by. I've really been looking forward to talking to you.
Same here.
And I'm glad you're here. Happy New Year.
Yes.
Let's begin with the elephant in the room, which is the what I would characterize. Others would say, "Oh no, this is very welcome and good." I would characterize it as the negative behavior on the part of citizens at Charlottesville City Council's public meetings in chambers that predates August 12th. This is not an August 12th thing. It was exacerbated by those events.
And we're just going to have to do this. We're going to have to do this. Okay, and all right, so we're going to suspend the meeting.
Kathy, you're literally on the front line at those city council meetings. You've been the object of aspersions, anger, epithets, ridicule, booing, condemnation by a very angry mob. Jim Hingley, longtime public defender, and I don't think you can get more liberal and blue than Jim Hingley in Charlottesville. He himself said at the most recent meeting, this is a real problem. There are people who don't come here to speak because they're afraid, because council had lost control of its meetings. And this is, he said, let's call it what it is, intimidation by an angry mob. Kathy, what crosses your mind? What has crossed your mind? How do you make sense of what's happening? And how do you think the public should understand what's going on?
Making sense out of this definitely predates August 12th. And I pin it on the day that Donald Trump was elected president. And I say that, and we've all been watching what's going on at the national level. We've all been watching the national discourse devolve into name calling, into a lot of racial bigotry. There is no decorum at the national level. And when I was reflecting back on when we had Obama as president, even when we had the Bushes as president, there was, especially with Obama, there was a sense of propriety, a sense of process, a sense of that we are one country working together to find the common good and to find solutions to the long-standing problems that have plagued us for hundreds of years. We don't get that from this president. I think what's happened is that people are angry as a result. And people are very angry when they feel helpless, when they feel like they're out of control. So I put that as the bigger context, is that there's a fury out there, particularly among people that are very much the liberal democratic, even beyond democratic stripe of being very left of center.
What I call the radical left. The social justice warriors on the left, often young people who appear like they're done talking. They just want to express some anger, and they want you to let them express some anger. And if you don't do what they want you to do, policy-wise, they're going to get even more angry.
Well, I was in middle school in 1968, and that was during the Vietnam War. And the demonstrations were wild and woolly. I came of age going to Boston University in the 70s. We were still doing lots of demonstrations, picketing against the university's administration because the economics department was providing some advice to the Chilean government, okay? So I remember those days. I remember those days of my youth. And activism is something that really does have a place and time in one's life and in one's country. I don't ever dispute that. The issue that we're getting around now, and it, I believe it does still stem from the president, is that we're seeing some basic understandings of what a democracy needs to exist. And there was an interesting article today by E.J. Dionne where he was...
And we're seeing the erosion of those basic things and the attack on those basic things.
Right, and I think we're seeing it at all levels. We're seeing it in national, state,
right, and left.
The government, the gubernatorial campaigns were really pretty raw when we were dealing with Gillespie and Northam. And then the local level. The local level, we are really feeling the heat because Charlottesville was ground zero for the alt-right making its stand to turn Charlottesville into its platform for its racist ideology. So you're going to get this extreme reaction because it was an extreme assault on the city of Charlottesville. Now, having said that, how do we get back to the point where it's not just anger and it's not just yelling and insulting and
threatening
and yeah, it does get very threatening at times. That to the point where there are some reporters that don't like to come to the press box anymore. There are people that don't like to come because they feel that they're not welcome. There is a very much a need to turn the temperature down and to get people to realize that if we can't listen to each other and tolerate differences in opinions, and in Charlottesville, those differences in opinions are not huge in the sense of, I'm going to be at the radical right, and the other person on the end of the dais is radical left.
No, Charlottesville's pretty blue by and large.
By and large.
By and large.
And so I think there's that idea that Dionne talked about today in his article of a moral tolerance for differences of opinion, and that then it's incumbent upon those of us who are in the political arena to then have forbearance, to have restraint, to not demonize our opponent.
Right. And to lead by example and insist that these democratic principles on which the country was founded are still critically important, like free assembly, like free speech. The challenge comes from, for example, the radical left in these city council meetings who don't believe in free speech. They don't want to hear from people. When somebody like a Jason Kessler goes up to speak at a city council meeting, which he is entirely legally and constitutionally permitted to do so, as heinous as what he might want to say is, people go nuts in the audience. They shout him down. F white supremacy. They scream. I was just rewatching the video on YouTube today. They scream out, "Don't give him a platform," as if the city government is being complicit in his agenda to allow his as a citizen to speak. So therefore, you have so many, especially young people, who've, I would argue, they've experienced much of this on college campuses. We don't want to hear from people that we don't agree with. We don't believe they should have a right to speak out because their views are so contrary to what I believe in. And that's a very rejection of, as you said earlier, the things on which a democracy are based that we need if a democracy is going to function.
again, going back to August 12th, I think one of the biggest assaults of free speech and free assembly was actually the violence that we saw that was perpetrated by the alt-right. And again, there's two wrongs don't make a right. And I spent all day today. I was in Richmond from 7:30 to 2:30 today. I gave witness at the Senate committee as they were deliberating many of the bills that we had put forth to control semi-automatic weapons, weapons of all kinds in public places, public buildings. And every single one of the bills to provide some sane gun control was shot down by this very, very tightly lipped, very closed group of senators that believe strongly in the right to bear arms.
So you're breaking that news here right now.
So yeah,
because I didn't know about that.
Yeah, so the thing that's interesting about that is that on August 12th, and that morning, I went down to spend time with residents in Friendship Court and residents in 6th Street public housing because I knew that they were a particularly vulnerable community, being African American and often immigrants. And so spending time there, and as I was crossing back across the mall, that's when I saw it looked like a war zone. And what you begin to see is when I saw some of the people dressed in fatigues with their automatic or semi-automatic rifles, just the mere sight of that was intimidating of other people's free speech and other people's free right to assemble without fear. So I think what we're seeing is still a backlash to that day. And again, two wrongs don't make a right. If we indulge that impulse to want to do the same that was done to us, we will then become a tyranny of our own. But it is an understandable reaction given how that group did very much assault our own right to speech, our own right to assemble. And again, we're going to have calm, collected leadership to get people back to an idea of how can we once again tolerate differences of opinion, once again have the restraint to not jump down someone's throat who's disagreeing with you. So I have to come at this with some real understanding of the context. It starts in many ways in my mind with the tenor of the national debates. They're not even debates. They're just shouting matches and throwing insults. It's what's going. It's the same thing that's happening in council chambers, but in a different topics, different subjects.
Yeah.
So I think the fraying of our fabric is something happening all over the country, and we really do have to be intentional about making sure we knit back together. So for me, I am advocating tomorrow when we talk in council chambers, and it seems to be an agreement among my colleagues that we need additional meetings, additional town halls. I don't think that
because that's been a complaint from the mob that we want more opportunities to yell at you.
Well,
or to quote unquote be heard.
And I have heard many people who are longstanding residents of Charlottesville, because of the tenor of the council chambers, they want more opportunities to speak as well. They don't feel comfortable coming into the council chambers.
But doesn't council do those town hall meetings in different neighborhoods? Been doing that for years.
We've been doing that, but I'm seeing that we need to take it to another level. And what I'm hearing by many different groups all over the city is a real desire to have a direct relationship between what they see us doing on the dais, making laws, making policy, passing different kinds of initiatives. They want to see that their input is directly fed into that process. Right now, we have this thing called the work session, which is where it's supposed to be not as strictly timed. It's when we explore ideas. We're trying to flesh out what are the policy implications of a particular item, and then it goes into the business session, which is when we vote on it. It's actionable. The staff take it and turn it into something that's an ordinance or a policy.
And there may or may not be a public hearing associated with that. That would be a couple of
right.
Yeah.
And town halls often are ideas. And one example of that is the demand of the public for controlling the deer population. I want to get a more calm topic, but for a lot of us that is a big issue. As I saw 15 deer in my backyard the other day. So it's that idea of wanting to control the deer as a topic came and surfaced in the town halls. We got it into working on a work session where staff gave us information. We got the expertise from the state level to explain to us what can be done, what can't be done, and then it got turned into an ordinance. And that kind of tie has got to be more often and more clear. And so I'm going to put forth, I could get shot down, no big deal. That happens all the time. But I'm going to put forth the idea that town hall happens once a month, and that there is more of a clear tie to that work session, business session process where we do show how we make the sausage, but we do demonstrate how the public brings us the ingredients.
To what extent is the very structure of the Charlottesville government a challenge for you, given that this council is basically an advisory to a professionally hired experts who work in City Hall? The city manager is the one who is supposed to, in this city manager form of government, to really run the government. And he does sit in on the Charlottesville City Council meetings, but usually doesn't talk unless asked to. The council comes up with the ideas and then charges the professional staff to realize the vision.
That's a really good question. Before we leave the topic of the town hall work session, business session, the nature of the council chambers itself is not conducive to dialogue between councilors and public. We are 10 feet above the public. It's already a subservient role or position that the public is put in, and that can be very off-putting. So the idea of the town hall being in council chambers does not work for me. It's got to be, ideally, we are sitting around a circle together and talking. And
like
really,
school board in a library.
Yeah.
You're just at tables, yeah.
Yeah. So now getting to your other question with regards to our form of government.
Because I know that can be frustrating for citizens who want to, yell at city council, why'd you do it this way? Well, we didn't do it that way. We hired professionals who looked at it and we endorsed it. But, and then it can also be frustrating for people like Mike Signer who want to be a very powerful elected mayor. And he ran into a number of walls and realized, this position isn't that. I can't necessarily do it.
That is a good example of why inexperience is not usually a good trait to have when you're taking on a leadership role. I'll get back to that later if we have time, but that was an understanding I clearly had after being on council and this is now my 6th year. I'm in my second year, my second term. I actually go into my 3rd year. My goodness. 3rd year, second term. It is clearly written in our charter that we are a city manager form of government, that the mayor is the chair of that board, nothing more, nothing less, and that the city manager is the person who is in charge of all the departments, fire, police, legal, and all the other departments. So we give policy direction. We are the policy makers, and that direction then gets churned into actionable items by staff. Actually, right now, one of the things I pushed for last year is that we need a policy analyst to work with us on council. Because right now, we all are paid part-time. Now, I have a more flexible arrangement because I teach and I consult. I'm an architect. But if you don't have that flexibility, it's really hard to get that policy analysis done. And so staff does some of that stuff for us, but then the manager is in charge of execution. And so I've likened it to, doing surgery with mittens on. We come up with the idea, we come up with the diagnosis, we have a prognosis, we have a prescription, but how it actually gets implemented is done by another entity, and that's the city manager and all of his or her staff. As you can imagine, though, if you have a council that wants to have or project executive functioning and is wanting to make sure everything is exactly the way that council wants, it does stymie the ability of the city manager to have a smooth running, effective, efficient government. So I see that the two parties have to really understand what their roles are, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about in our retreat. I've been pushing the discussion that we started back in 2014, never finished. What is the role of the mayor? What is the role of the city manager? What is the role of the council? And how do we all work together for the greater good of the city of Charlottesville? So I think these are very important questions to be asking. And again, getting back to why we have a city manager form of government, Virginia kind of started it all, and it was in reaction to what was perceived as corrupt big city politics.
Right. Electing people who were corrupted.
Yeah, so you needed to get the technocrat, the expert. It was the ultimate in progressive government at the time.
Created in Stanton, Virginia, just up in the valley.
Yes.
We're talking with Kathy Galvin. She's a member of the Charlottesville City Council beginning the third year of her second term. What are your thoughts, Kathy, about those who said in protests, you have blood on your hands? You let this rally take place. You didn't try hard enough to stop it on August 12th. It shouldn't have been here, and a young woman was killed as a result, and people went into the hospital as a result, and two police officers wouldn't arguably have been in that helicopter that day who died in the helicopter crash for technical reasons due to the copter, but they arguably wouldn't have been up there. They were shooting video of what was going on.
Right. The loss of life and the injuries to the dozens of people because of the events of that day wear on me every day. I was on the dais when that happened. As the elected official, it is where the buck stops. As again, we're policy makers. We don't execute the policy. That's why this is something that does involve both the council and the executive branch. So reforming whatever we need to reform to make sure that this does not happen again is first and foremost on my agenda. That means having an operational plan that works. That means having a police department that knows what the chain of command is, that actually has communications that are really streamlined between all different departments. And we actually have to have a police department that actually does engage in community policing. We've been talking about it for a long time, but we've also been seeing this past year, there's just not just past year, the past 5 years I've been on council, constant tension between members of our community and the police department. We have got to get serious about community policing and start putting the initiatives in place to make that happen, because then that's how you build the trust with the police department. That's how the police department then builds that rapport with the public.
I've lived here for almost 30 years, and I've seen sort of this waxing and waning of community policing in Charlottesville. It's like sometimes there's more of an effort, then it's pulled back, then sometimes more of an effort. And
an interesting observation that was made by the President Obama's task force on 21st century policing was that the importance of having your police officers live in the communities they serve. That is, and that the police officers actually are grown out of the communities they serve. So that there are academies in high school where kids that maybe would not have ever thought about going into law enforcement can actually get a taste of it, like an apprenticeship program. That there is the Police Foundation does have a housing assistance program to assist police officers with down payments, because their entry level salary is very low. They qualify for the low income community because they can't afford the down payment of a house without assistance. And so I think we have to do a much better job of creating a range of affordable housing in the city. More townhouses, for example, are being built in Albemarle County than they are here. There's a lot that needs to be done simultaneously to get at that notion of how do you create an effective community policing strategy. But I think we would be remiss. And the same thing happens with teachers. Teachers can't afford to live in the city of Charlottesville. Both teachers and police officers. Yeah, well, their starting salary is like $35,000 to $40,000. That's for police and teaching, and they can't find a place to live in Charlottesville and be close to their charges.
It's about twice as much as a new reporter at a TV station.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah. Hey,
well,
I want to underscore something that you mentioned in the first half of this conversation that those who are joining us might have missed. You're just coming from Richmond. You were in on some meetings today in Richmond. And again, all the proposed legislation that would have given us some kind of sensible gun control when it comes to these kind of political rallies like we saw on August 12th, those were killed in subcommittee. You saw that happen today.
I saw that happen today. I was asked to come and be a witness and testify before the Senate committee. It went from like 8 o'clock to about 12:30, and they went through 40 some odd bills, and a good percentage of them had to deal with dealing with better regulations for guns in public places, making sure you had background checks, making sure that people that had any kind of instability or history of anger management or mental illness were actually given more assistance to make sure the guns stayed out of their hands as they got assistance. All of it was rejected. So it's an interesting phenomenon when you see that. It gets back to local government. Our form about local government. We are a Dillon rule state. So localities cannot dictate their own destiny. We have to go to the General Assembly to get permission
to scratch your nose.
Well, and it is.
But you can prevent people from bringing guns into a basketball game, but you can't prevent people from bringing guns to a free speech rally. But other communities do, but we're not allowed to in Virginia.
Not in Virginia.
Yeah.
And so, it's related to private property. A property owner can put rules in place that a government can't. And it's just kind of related to this idea of being the public realm. But in Virginia, which is interesting, historically Republicans have been the party that wanted to put more power into the local hands, and that historically it was always thought the Democrats were the ones that wanted centralized big government. Well, I think that's more of a function of power. When you have the power, you want to keep it. And so you're not seeing any relenting on the part of what is a dominant Republican Senate, strong on Second Amendment rights. And what I made in my testimony, I made the case that I made earlier in our talk today that at some point, public safety is on par with the preservation of the Bill of Rights. And at some point, when you're allowing unbridled interpretation of the right to bear arms to then infringe upon the other's right to assemble and the right to have free speech in a safe place where they don't feel they're in harm's way, you have canceled out your Bill of Rights. So there's got to be a holistic view.
I mean, the First Amendment has the word peaceably.
Yeah.
Citizens have the right to peaceably assemble. I mean, they went out of their way to say that's the kind of assembly we're talking about. But when you allow the Second Amendment to trump the First, and you say, no, load up your guns, bring your loaded guns to your quote-unquote peaceable assembly.
There is the imbalance. Yeah. There is the imbalance. There's the bias. And we can't be in a cafeteria mode, right? Where I'm only gonna support this Bill of Rights. No, you got to support them all.
Yeah. So, and the same thing, I guess, the Dillon Rule would apply to the Confederate statues as well. They're not about to empower localities to decide for themselves what happens to these statues.
It does not look like it. Does not look like it. And it's an interesting thing.
Meanwhile, the city's being sued over its decision to remove the statues, overthrowing the tarp over the statues. And I have said publicly, and I believe they're going to lose. You're going to lose that suit because the law right now, as it's currently written, isn't on the side of the city.
It's so from the General Assembly viewpoint as well as the court's viewpoint, it does look like it's an uphill battle. And
on the
that,
city's part to remove the statues.
Yes.
And to even keep the tarps on them.
Yeah. Well, we've got, back in November, we approved, it was actually a resolution that gave a very detailed instruction to our Director of Parks and Recreation on how to get some design assistance so that we move towards creating a better way to screen the statues and add context, knowing that there's going to be a near-term solution and a long-term solution. Ultimately, the statues will go. Someday they will. But in the near term, there needs to be a process right now to bring people together. Because right now there's no context. There's no narrative about what these statues mean.
No, it's veneration of the U.S. Confederacy as it was intended to be when it went up in the early 1920s.
Right. And so,
what about some localities have sold public parks as a way around the law and saying, well, we're going to go ahead and sell the land. Of course, that would mean more lawsuits, but they have successfully, in some cases, sold public land to private landowners who then have the statues removed from private land. Because although I think the law might still apply to even the private land, I'm not quite sure.
That was a bit of a controversy, actually. There are many situations all over the country where you have privately owned public land. The most famous one is like Rockefeller Plaza, right? And it's like everyone thinks of that as great public space, which it is, but it's actually owned by a corporation. There have been times where people, with regards to the downtown mall, they wanted to make sure that you couldn't smoke on the mall, right? That smoking's really unhealthy. They don't like all the cigarette butts. They don't like their children being exposed to smoke. There's other people that come and they don't like being interrupted by some of the panhandlers or some of the people that are on the mall that cause a disturbance. But those of us that are used to the mall, those of us that are used to urban life, this is just it. This is the way it is. The concern, if that wasn't a public space, a truly public space, we could quote unquote clean it up, in which case there would be restrictions. In fact, something like this happened in Bethesda Row. There was a section of Bethesda Row when it was redeveloped that was redeveloped and made privately owned. And somebody was just there taking pictures and the security guard was called on them to tell them that you're trespassing. So it's not that simple, a situation. If you give up your public space, you all of a sudden are becoming extremely exclusive. I don't think that's what we want. We need to keep inclusive, truly public places. True public places are inclusive.
You lost the bid to be mayor at the last vote when Nikiah Walker, who just won election to council, and you made a point that I sort of underscored on my Facebook page, and you mentioned earlier in this conversation about experience. And you said that this is not the kind of position that you can learn on the go, and if you want to, good luck, because look what happened to Mike. And you didn't say, look what happened to Mike. I said, look what happened to Mike. But it's a great example. And I think it proved your point. Mike's a good guy. He's a smart guy. He's a very smart guy. But he didn't have a successful run as mayor of the city of Charlottesville. And one could argue it really damaged, if not completely ruined, his hopes, his not so secret hopes to seek higher office in the future.
I can't pretend to look at the crystal ball. all I know is what I see. And what is that old adage? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I did see a direct link to inexperience as to what happened with the mayorship. And in my mind, it was related to not a clarity in the distinction between executive branch and legislative branch. We're the legislative branch. The executive branch is Mr. Jones and his team. That is what caused the tension, the problems, and during that whole time immediately after the August 12th, and issues with the personnel matters being posted and leaks of memos and excerpts of my emails included in the memo that I had no idea were being included, and it wasn't the total story. So you're absolutely right. There are so many things that Mr. Signer has put forth that I support. Really good policy. I think if anything, I'm going to be looking forward to seeing a legislator kind of blossom these next 2 years. And so, we've made a mistake writ large as a country. I didn't vote for Mr. Trump. I did vote for Mr. Signer, so that I take that responsibility 2 years ago. But Mr. Trump is someone who is, again, example of, we don't need experience. We don't need to know how to do this, because I just have an intuition about it. The other thing that's important, very important in my mind, about being an effective leader and being on a council or any kind of body is that you reach out, you engage, you talk, and you demonstrate an ability to collaborate and build coalitions. And if you don't have experience, but you have that strong suit, I can take it seriously. In fact, that's what happened with Mr. Signer 2 years ago. Vice mayor, for example, is a very different animal. It's kind of like the trainee of the mayorship, but lately the vice mayors have not evolved into mayors. They fill in, but that's kind of it's not as a hugely important position to have experience.
Right.
But having that ability to talk and collaborate is a genuine skill and a trait. So if you don't have those two, or you only have one and not the other, the one thing you have is going to be really good.
Right. So what happens with Charlottesville City Council meetings now? What happens the next time somebody goes up to speak that this mob of people in the audience doesn't agree with, doesn't like, and they start screaming and yelling, and they start cursing, and they start getting angry at City Council for giving these people a platform to go up and say what they want to say that they don't want to hear? What happens?
I think...
I mean, the rules would say that the mayor would call somebody to order, and then if they have to call them again, then the police would escort them from the room. That's what the rules say, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
We haven't seen that in the least for months.
And we have a new mayor, and I am going to urge everyone to just give Mayor Walker some space. Let us all watch and see how she assumes in this leadership role and what happens in council chambers. I do agree that when you're not consistently applying the laws of the chamber, the rules of the chamber, it leads to confusion on the part of the public. And that had been happening quite a bit.
Yeah. But one of the things that's working against us here, I guess, is people like Wes Bellamy who say, no, I don't want to enforce these rules. As long as it's somebody that I agree with, I want to hear from them. They should yell and scream. This is the hashtag New Charlottesville or New Seville is what he's been tweeting, that this is what it's going to look like in the future, and we should embrace this. But if it was somebody, if it was a white supremacist, say, who was doing the same kind of behavior, he would be the first person to say, get the police in here and get rid of them. So it is content-based discrimination. And as we were talking about before we went on the air today, it's just a matter of time before the city gets sued for this. Because That's what it is. You're discriminating based on content on what can and can't be said in the public square at your very own meetings.
And we're going to begin that conversation tomorrow night about what those rules will be. We're going to continue that in the retreat. And there's 5 counselors. So everyone has their own opinion about what the rules should be and the decorum, the atmosphere of the council chambers. How and what people say in terms of their message to the council when they get up at the podium, they can describe and explain however they wish, in my mind.
Yeah.
It is a problem, and you pointed it out, when counselors are saying things that are not in accord with a sizable chunk of the population that's in the council chambers, and when they're heckled and booed so loudly that their right to free speech is hampered. I do think that that's a serious issue.
Yeah.
So,
and as I said, we've seen the same kind of behavior for years on college campuses, and now those young people have grown up a little bit, and they're out in communities like Charlottesville. They're going to city council meetings, and they think this is what you're supposed to do. That this is appropriate behavior. I'm going to mob up. I'm going to shout down somebody I don't agree with, and that's how I express my political views.
Well, that's your valid assessment of you based on your own perceptions.
Very politic of you.
I have already explained, because this is my getting on to my 7th year on council. It's only been in the last year and a half or so that I have seen such a change in tenor in the council chambers, which has then started to affect the tone on the dais. I'm seeing an amazing correlation between that and the president's behavior in Washington, D.C. And I also saw the anxiety during the gubernatorial election. I am very happy that Mr. Northam is now our governor. His message of inclusion with compassion is exactly what we need to be hearing. His inaugural comments were like balm on the soul for me. And as the Washington Post reported, in his thick waterman's accent. So we need good leaders who, as also Mr. Northam said, a good leader doesn't have to be the loudest person in the room.
I agree with everything you're saying, and I should say Ralph is a friend, and I agree with everything you're saying. However, here's a hypothetical for you. Ralph Northam goes to Charlottesville City Council and stands up at the public comment and says, in his very soft-spoken, pediatric neurosurgeon voice, I think we ought to be more civil in our meetings and just everybody have a little bit more respect for each other and the rule of law. And I can hear him saying, what's wrong with have him say exactly what Jim Hensley said. What's wrong with being more civil and bringing honor back into this room? And he would be shouted down. He would be booed. Even Ralph Northam. So while I agree with you, I also agree with you that we got a real problem right now. And the real problem is not, to me, the issue is democracy. I've been called every name in the book on Facebook for sharing these views. But I keep going back to, at the end of the day, all I'm doing is trying to say that democracy is important. And the things that we rely on to make democracy work, like free speech, like free assembly, like letting everyone be heard from in the public square, even if you hate them, even if you hate what they have to say, that's critical. And yet, the extremes on the right and the left don't buy that anymore. Especially young people. They don't believe in this anymore. The radical left thinks democracy is a tool of white supremacy, that any pleas for civility in Charlottesville City Council meetings are just white supremacy. And the radical right thinks that democracy isn't strong enough a tool of white supremacy. That's why they don't like it. But the end result is the same. Democracy. We tried that. That doesn't work.
I think this is a period of time that, a lot of us are going to have to work together in bringing back that notion of calm, productive, effective discourse that gives us the actual laws and tools that we need to change the quality of life for so many of our residents. A lot of the anger that is also still coming up is the persistent chronic poverty in Charlottesville. It is the housing problems are severe, and this kind of a coincidence of frustration with both the fear and anger of August 12th combined with, wow, this has been a long-standing problem. We've known about this for a long time. And we have been tackling it bit by bit with our investments in the housing fund and our investments in really good job training programs. But the public is saying we need to do more. The thing is, I agree with them.
What does the mob want? What's the solution there? The city to build really nice public housing for really cheap? So as a way to try to impact the market? I mean, that's socialism, basically. The city is going to build and own public buildings and rent them out to people. And we're not just talking about Section 8 housing here. We're talking about broad enough to have a real impact in the marketplace and try to bring prices down. That seems to be what they're advocating for.
That's some voices are saying that. The people that have been at this hard work for a long time, the housing providers, the residents themselves, there's an understanding that we need more tools, and that again, bumping up with the Dillon rule. And now I get a real taste of how difficult it's going to be. We can't get inclusionary zoning, for example, in Charlottesville. That means, unlike California, unlike New York, where any development has got to have a certain percentage of affordable housing in it, no carrots, just it's done, or else you don't get the project. We can't do that. We're absolutely prohibited from doing that.
There is some law, though, that says new development has to have a certain percentage, and they usually buy their way out of it and give the money to the city to put towards public housing. Well, that's only when you
do a special use permit.
Okay.
You got to, if you're going by right zoning, you don't have to do anything.
And they can charge whatever they want to charge. And they're going to charge at the high end of the market.
And the problem with in many areas of our city, we gave building height away. So right now we've got to figure out, well, how can we create the carrot that's going to actually result in building units on the ground? Because right now there's that special use permit for density. And so if they want more density, they have to provide housing on site or off site or give us cash. They always give us the cash, which is not even enough to build a unit, really.
But it's just the cost of doing business to a developer. These factors it in.
And I've been making this argument for a long time that the special use permits, which are a form of speculation, because the existing zoning says this, and then you've got a range.
But you can buy your way out of it.
Well, but that inherently inflates the value of the land. Any kind of speculative negotiation winds up adding cost to the process, but it winds up kind of jacking up the value of it. So let's like calm it down. I want to get much more clarity in our zoning. Okay, if
to the extent that Richmond will allow you.
Yeah, in Richmond, it's
not necessarily going to allow the city to do what those screening at the city council meetings will want, but they don't get that. The problem is not Charlottesville; it's Richmond.
And so we need these town halls. Will be an opportunity to actually have more one-on-one, eyeball-to-eyeball conversations about these sorts of things instead of us sitting on the dais looking down and then getting people, yelling at us what their views are.
I agree with you that the tenor of the political conversation, Trump certainly doesn't help. You can go back into the 80s and 90s and the beginning of sort of the Fox model of bringing talk radio, conservative talk radio programming into television, which is what Fox was doing. It wasn't news. It was pretty much talk radio on TV with people screaming and yelling. And that has had an impact as well over the last few decades. We've really seen a changing way in which we talk about politics in America, and that plus money in politics and the gerrymandering and all this stuff has tended to.
Don't forget social media.
And social media, it creates the bubbles, all of which, the end result of which is it fans the flames of extremism. And we've certainly seen that on the right and the left. Just a really extreme, almost religious way of thinking about your political beliefs. And the sort of quick knee-jerk action to attack a heretic, for example. You're not as left as me. You're not as right as me. So I'm going to attack you. And we're seeing that on both sides. I mean, it really was fascinating that Kristen Zachos wasn't liberal enough in Charlottesville. Goodness gracious. Jim Hingley isn't liberal enough in Charlottesville. That's really disconcerting. And what does it mean about the left?
Well, what does it mean for the future?
Yeah.
And I think, again, I am committed to that idea of coalition building. I am committed to that one-on-one communication. People kind of, it's interesting how I can be misjudged quite a bit. And I really try not to judge people or read into their motives. That's between them and their God or whatever spirit they belong to. I grew up pretty working class in a dying shoe factory town in New England, and the language of the street was rich and colorful, and in my mind, it made an already hard life that much meaner. So I have grown up seeing and hearing what real mean talk does to people. And I refuse to do it. I refuse to do it myself. I didn't teach my sons to do that.
And it's got to be so disappointing to see that in public meetings of government.
Well, it's all you can do is lead by example. We are still people that are there, and I cannot, and for whatever reason, I'm viewed as being inauthentic, but that is me. I do my homework. I get down and bore down to the bottom of things to make sure I'm comfortable with my decisions, and I'll ask whatever question I need to. I will not swear at you in a public place, or even in a private place. And I insist on treating people with dignity. That's me, and that's always going to be how I do it. And I had parents, and again, my dad was 8th grade education. He was disabled by the World War II. My mother was a public school nurse, kept missing promotions because she was not the so-called breadwinner when she was. So poverty being equated with, not being civil and polite is something that is jarring to me. There are many people that are of low wealth that would not believe that being cruel and crass and rude in your speech is reflective of them. So the big broad wash across everyone who doesn't speak that way, somehow it represents that we're elitist. No, it represents who I am. I respect you. I'm not going to demean you by the way I talk.
I wrote on Facebook today that I think there's millions of liberals in America and thousands here in Charlottesville, both black and white, who might agree with these people who are interrupting the Charlottesville City Council meetings, who could be very empathetic to their anger and resentment and disappointment about what's going on in their neighborhoods and in the city. But at the same time, they don't necessarily agree with their tactics. They don't want to join the mob. They don't believe in bullying and threatening in a public meeting. And they don't see the need to resort to yelling, mother effer or F you to city council over and over again. And it doesn't mean that they're endorsing racism or inequities in the system. It just means that they don't believe in a mob behavior. That they really do believe it's important that democracy has some element of respect for others who don't agree with you. That's going to serve you in the end.
Well, and it's also, it's a form of hospitality. And I don't know of really any culture in the world that doesn't emphasize the importance of being kind and generous, especially to the stranger, to the person that comes into your home. Most major religious traditions teach that. So I hope we can find that, as E.J. Dionne wrote today, that moral tolerance and forbearance again, because those are fundamental to our ability to self-govern.
Kathy, thank you for being here, and thank you for your service to Charlottesville.
Well, thank you for inviting me or letting me come.
You've been listening to the Citizens Band Radio Hour, a production of the Center for Media and Citizenship at the University of Virginia. Archived podcasts are available online at mediaandcitizenship.org. The executive producers for the program are Siva Vaidyanathan and Koi Barefoot.